Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is David Daoud, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. David, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure to be on, Brittany. Thank you for having me.
Israel and Hezbollah each exchanged major rocket strikes over the weekend. So can you talk about the moment that we're in right now?
Well, I think now we're in a moment of de-escalation. And to understand why we're here, we need to go back a little bit. So as we know, Hezbollah started attacking Israel on October 8th in support of its allies in Gaza, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and other groups that had launched the October 7th attack on Israel. The goal then was to get Israel to ceasefire, to prematurely stop its operations in Gaza, and Hezbollah would back down from its own attacks. Now, this conflict in the north has lasted a lot longer than Hezbollah expected by their own admission. And the longer you have a war of attrition of the type that we have in the north going on, the more of a chance you have for some kind of mistake to happen. Now, in Hezbollah's case, this came on July 27th when an errant rocket struck a soccer field in Majd al-Shams, a Druze community in northern Israel, killed 12 Israeli children. In response to that, Israel had to exact a heavy price for the death of 12 of its citizens and 12 children at that. They ended up assassinating Hezbollah's chief of staff, Fuad Shukr, a notorious terrorist who's been a member of the organization for years and has been involved in the death of Americans as well. And they killed him in Beirut. They killed him with precise intelligence. From what we understand, a phone call minutes before the strike had lured him to his demise. The building that was brought down that he was in, collateral damage was caused, civilians were killed, and then the Israelis claimed the attack. So there's the pain that was caused to Hezbollah directly, there's the assault on Beirut, right, on Hezbollah's stronghold in South Beirut, then there's the embarrassment that comes from the Israelis claiming this. Hezbollah had to respond in some way that was commensurate with the Israeli offense. But at the same time, they don't want a war yet. We can discuss why they don't want a war yet. So they have to thread that needle very carefully and exact a revenge attack that would, again, close the file on Shukr and move us back into a place where they've resumed their routine attacks, but not full war. So that attack has happened. Hezbollah has claimed success, and so now we've moved into de-escalation.
So what you're saying is that's the full extent of Hezbollah's response to the killing of their chief of staff, and now that's why we're in the moment of de-escalation.
Yeah, so it seems to be. Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah gave a speech within hours after the Hezbollah retaliatory attack and said, we're done. Right? There was some ambiguity in the initial Hezbollah statement where it said the first phase had been completed, and he clarified that the attack itself was comprised of two phases. They both succeeded. Hezbollah is done. At the same time, he did put an asterisk on that where he said, if the price to be exacted was not sufficient, we reserve the right to attack again at a time and place of our choosing. My sense is that in terms of kind of a major attack from the north, that's done. We could see something from Hezbollah akin to what happened. So in February of 2008, Shukr's predecessor, Ahmad Moghni, well, two predecessors ago, Ahmad Moghni and his compatriot in Hezbollah from years ago, was assassinated in a joint Mossad CIA operation in Damascus. Hezbollah waited 4 years to attack the Israelis, to retaliate against the Israelis. They bombed a bus in Burgas in Bulgaria. If I recall correctly, 5 Israeli civilians were killed, but don't quote me on that specific number. We could see something like that, where they wait years, they attack a soft underbelly target of the Israelis, but the message is clear that this is for Shukr.
There's been concerns worldwide that there's going to be a wider Middle East war. You raised an interesting question in your first response that Hezbollah right now does not want a full-out war yet. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to emphasize they don't want the war right now. It doesn't mean they don't want a full regional war against Israel at some point. And the reason why, there's a twofold reason why they don't want the war right now. Lebanon, so Hezbollah, it's ultimately loyal to Iran, but it exists in Lebanon. This is essentially the house in which Hezbollah lives. That house has been on fire for a very long time, proverbially speaking. in October of 2019, almost 5 years ago, Lebanon's economy collapsed. And that economy, it started to bottom out, but it hasn't recovered yet. The Lebanese currency has lost almost 100% of its value. Electricity is in hard demand. Infrastructure is bad, right? The country is not, Lebanon is effectively a failed state. Compound that with the fact that Lebanon has also been in a state of political stagnation for almost 2 years. There's been a political vacancy, a presidential vacancy rather, for almost 2 years. And without a president, who's really a figurehead, but he starts the political process in Lebanon. Nothing can move forward. Meanwhile, Lebanon's former benefactors, both in the West and in the Gulf, have cut off Lebanon from any aid until Lebanon enacts genuine political and economic reforms. These will not be forthcoming because the people that would have to reform the system would essentially be putting themselves in jail. So Hezbollah has wanted to navigate this collapse, of which it takes partially responsibility for where Lebanon is today, without compounding it with a security conflagration with Israel. They've been very hesitant about attacking the Israelis over the past 5 years. They've tried to thread that needle very carefully, and they don't want to be perceived as the ones that really pushed Lebanon over the edge. As much as the average Lebanese may care about Palestine, it's still a cause that's foreign to Lebanon. So that's the one angle. The other angle is that the attack against Israel, this promised regional war, is not going to be Hezbollah alone. It's going to be Hezbollah with the rest of the resistance axis. So this is an Iranian-led regional alliance of organizations like Hezbollah, like Hamas, the Houthis, the Iraqi Shia militias. They intend to attack Israel all at once, except on the one hand, their domestic conditions are akin to Lebanon's in a lot of ways, and their capabilities. These organizations, as much as they love to engage in bellicose rhetoric, Nasrallah the other day just admitted Israel's conventional military superiority over them. They want to bridge that gap as much as possible to maximize the chances of success. The cherry on top, if you will, is that they want Iran to have a nuclear capability, not so Iran can strike Israel with a nuclear weapon necessarily, but so that it can at least provide a nuclear umbrella for the ring of fire that these organizations are building around Israel. So those two parts have to be complete. If they go to a regional war now, if the resistance axis goes to a regional war now, that project that they're working on, that preparation that they're working on, could be set back indefinitely, and they're not going to risk that.
Your wording here is extremely important. You're saying it's not that they don't want a war at all, they just don't want a war right now. So is there any indication of when that timing would be for a potential all-out Middle East war?
No, I don't think this is something that we can necessarily put a timeline on. All we can say is that it will be very destructive. These organizations are not static. If we look at, the Hezbollah timeline, just Israel vis-a-vis Hezbollah, the Israelis withdrew from South Lebanon in May 25th of 2000 on the assumption that this would deprive Hezbollah of any excuse to continue attacking Israel. I think this was underpinned by a severe misunderstanding of the organization and its capabilities by then Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who is still not taking accountability for this mistake that he made. And what Hezbollah was then was a relatively small, powerless organization. Yes, they were able to hurt, but compared to Hezbollah of today, they were nothing. Then you fast forward 6 years to the Second Lebanon War, Hezbollah had grown relative to 2000 exponentially. Now from 2006 till today, it's about 18 years if my math serves me. It's a lifetime. In that time, they have built up their arsenal much larger. In the Second Lebanon War, they had a total of 14,000 projectiles. Now they have something like 200,000 projectiles, an assortment of projectiles, including long-range missiles, drones, loitering munitions, anti-tank guided missiles. Their arsenal is not just quantitatively larger; it is qualitatively more advanced. Beyond that, they've had much military experience in the intervening years, especially the war in Syria. So they've learned how to control territory, how to fight as a conventional army as well. Now, this doesn't bridge the gap between them and the Israelis. All it's to say is that they are a much more powerful organization they are today than they were a few years ago. Fast forward 10 years, 20 years, that pattern will repeat itself. So when that war does happen, and I can assure you that it will be the resistance axis that initiates it, and we can talk about why they will be the ones to initiate it rather than the Israelis, the war, when it happens, is going to be much more destructive than it would be if it happened today, as destructive as it would be today.
I do now want to switch gears a little bit and look at Iran. So we saw Hezbollah's retaliation. The world over the past couple of weeks really has been bracing from a retaliation from Iran against Israel after a Hamas leader was killed in Tehran. We haven't seen that retaliation yet. So is there any indication of when that will be?
I think what's been holding both sides back is, again, the timing. They want to prepare this properly. Nasrallah, Secretary General Nasrallah talked about this yesterday, that they wanted to make sure that they got the target right, that things didn't lead to an escalation. But beyond that, ceasefire talks, right? The primary goal of the resistance axis in getting involved in this fight has been from the outset that they want Israel's campaign in Gaza to halt prematurely, so that, and I'm quoting Nasrallah from November 3rd, so that the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, so that Hamas in Gaza will emerge victorious. That's their goal. They want Hamas to survive, be able to rebuild, and be able to prepare to attack Israel again in the future. So the broader goal here, more important than Haniyeh, more important than Shukr, more important than any of these specifics, is that this war ends. They're not going to do something that will jeopardize ceasefire talks. Now, those ceasefire talks are snagging, right? I think just before I got on this call, I saw a headline that showed that Hamas is saying, we're not part of the ongoing talks that are happening in Cairo. Does that mean the talks are over or not, or just Hamas is playing hard to get? We will see. But I think for so long as those ceasefire talks are continuing, then Iran will hold back its retaliation. Now, what will that retaliation look like? We had an example earlier in April of one kind of retaliation the Iranians could engage in. They also have other options. They have more clandestine options that they can use, either to hit soft underbelly targets that the Israelis have around the globe, or to use assets that they've cultivated within Israel and within Israeli-held territory, the West Bank, to attack the Israelis. Maybe a suicide bombing inside Israel, something that would, again, send the message, tit for tat, if anything, right? The Israelis were able to set off a bomb in Tehran. Well, what if Iran can set off a bomb in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem? I think that would be a tit for tat retaliation. It's a possibility we could see.
You brought up the ceasefire talks. Currently, those are happening in Cairo right now. Have the strikes we've seen over the weekend, will that do anything to potential negotiations? I know that they're snagging, as you said. So what can we expect from them?
I think they're operating on two parallel tracks that sometimes overlap, right? Where Nasrallah has said that Hamas is negotiating not just on behalf of itself, but on behalf of the entire resistance axis. And therefore, the rest of the resistance axis is going to operate according to the ceasefire talks. There's still its own internal dynamic, namely Israeli control of the Philadelphia corridor, hostage release versus security prisoner release. What security prisoners are the Israelis willing to release? What deployment they'll have in Gaza after these ceasefire talks? Will they be able to reserve the right to resume military operations? Because as far as I know, the Israelis have not backed down, nor should they really, from the goal of dismantling Hamas militarily and as a governmental structure. If they leave a nucleus of Hamas there, the organization will rebuild and continue to threaten Israel. Obviously, Hamas, from its perspective, does not want to be destroyed or dismantled or have its military or governmental capabilities wiped out. So we're seeing this snag. At the same time, we saw the Qataris today, I think it was the Qatari foreign minister, had visited Iran for meetings to ask the Iranians to continue delaying their response, because to give ceasefire negotiations enough time to succeed. So it doesn't seem like those ceasefire negotiations, for all of the drama and tension that is going on, have entirely been called off. But both sides are trying to maximize their leverage and their gains.
I want to talk about your thoughts on the United States' response, because Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said this over the weekend. He said he spoke with the Israeli Minister of Defense, and he said, quote, he reaffirmed the United States' ironclad commitment to Israel's defense against any attacks by Iran and its regional partners and proxies. The U.S. has also consistently said that they don't want to see escalation in the region. What do you make of our response?
I think it's not consistent, unfortunately. The way that Israel's adversaries, who are actually our adversaries, perceive this is, I'll quote Nasrallah from, I believe it was in March, where he said, if the Americans put their foot down, the Israelis quake in fear. He was talking about the dynamic of the relationship between Israel and the United States, negating the idea that there's a Jewish lobby that controls America, that Israel controls America. He said, no, the opposite. Again, he said, when the Americans put their foot down, the Israelis quake in fear. When the Americans stop weapons shipments, The IDF chief of staff takes out his little ledger and starts counting how many artillery shells he has left over. So they understand through this, right? What he was trying to say is that Israel's freedom of action is basically controlled in Washington. It basically comes from Washington. And he didn't explicitly say this, but the less freedom of action that they perceive the Israelis as having, the more freedom of action that they perceive themselves as having, right? Because they understand that they can raise the threshold, they can push the limit, they can come up to Israel's red lines, maybe even push them a little bit. And because of that American restraint on Israeli freedom of action, Israel is going to have to tolerate it, and Hezbollah can be assured that it will not be subject to a wider campaign, an Israeli campaign in Lebanon, because of this American restraint on Israel. So we need to be more consistent, I think, here in the United States.
Israel's really seeing a multi-front war right now. So what specifically are you looking out for next?
Well, I focus mostly on Hezbollah. And what I would look for is, if the ceasefire talks don't succeed, this war of attrition is going to continue. And as we mentioned earlier, the longer such a conflict continues, the more risk. Every day there's going to be, you can have all the calculations that you want on either side. The more risk there's going to be of a miscalculation. We saw this in Majd al-Shams on July 27th. This goes on for another 10 months. There could be another Majd al-Shams or two. This could go on in another 2 weeks. This could happen, right? So the longer this war conflict, this war of attrition goes on, the more of a risk of a mistake there is that could lead to a broader escalation. Conversely, if a ceasefire is achieved today between Israel and Hezbollah, it'll be a momentous victory for Hezbollah from the point of view of its propaganda. You have 60 to 80,000, some estimates have even said more, Israelis that have been displaced from their homes by Hezbollah attacks. There's a security zone, a buffer zone within Israeli territory, something like 5 kilometers deep, for the first time in the country's history. And this is something that has not been, the Israelis, through force of arms, have not been able to reverse. They've not been able to get Hezbollah to back down from its commitment to supporting Gaza militarily, nor have they been able to push Hezbollah from the border. If a ceasefire is achieved under current conditions, Hezbollah can easily frame this as, well, remember in May 2000, when we pushed the Israelis out of South Lebanon, well, in 2024, we pushed them out of, quote, occupied Palestine, and they could only return to their, as Hezbollah calls them, their colonies with our permission that was only obtained through international interlocutors begging us to allow the Israelis to return. So if your objective, if what you're telling your public is that, as Hezbollah, we're promising you blood, sweat, and tears, but it's a necessary goal. Destroying Israel is necessary because Israel's very existence is a threat to your lives. But in the meantime, we're going to suffer a lot until we destroy Israel. You have to show that your methods are working. And what Hezbollah can turn to its base and say is, you suffered for the past 10 months, but look, we pushed them out of their own entity. The liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea, as Nasrallah routinely says, is that much more imminent. So just stay the course.
So to your point then, let's say there was a ceasefire reached today. Does that mean there's never going to be a wider regional war, or there's just not going to be a wider regional war yet?
There won't be a wider regional war yet. I think Hezbollah will go back to what it's been doing for the past really 24 years since the Israelis withdrew from South Lebanon, with the exception of the punctuation of the Second Lebanon War, 6, which is to continue arming, to continue improving their arsenal, to continue improving their military capabilities, to continue what they've been calling the unification of the fronts, this increasing coordination and cooperation with the other factions of the resistance axis, sharing military expertise, getting everyone on the same page, and also building up assets within Israel. This is something that we've seen not just now, but over many decades. In the Second Intifada, I forget what many percentage of attacks, according to Shin Bet, was in some way sponsored by Hezbollah, coming from the West Bank. So they are, in the wake of the May 2021 conflict between Israel and Gaza, the Israeli police noticed an uptick in weapons being shipped from Lebanon into the West Bank. Now, all of a sudden, we have all these groups, Lion's Den, these new Pidge spin-offs, the Jenin Battalion, the Nablus Battalion, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades has somehow come back. These are all organizations that in some way are part of this broader network that is led by Iran. And Hezbollah has taken point on arming these groups, on training them. When you look at what they did, a lot of what Hamas has accomplished in Gaza, their entrenchment, their military sophistication owes to Hezbollah. So continuing this process, building this ring of fire is something that they'll continue to focus on until the day when they feel they are ready to launch this regional war against Israel. And that could be, again, 10 years, 5 years, longer.
Well, David, thank you so much for your insight, for your expertise. As the situation develops in the Middle East, I hope you come back on and break it down for us. David Daoud, thank you so much.
It'd be my pleasure to come back on. Thank you.